Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will start the webinar in a few seconds, just leaving a bit of time for the 300 plus registered participants to join. Thank you very much for being here. Okay, good. I think we have a quorum here. Good morning again, good afternoon. My name is Aziza Akmouche. I'm heading at the OECD, the Cities, Urban Policies and Sustainable Development Division in the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. And it's my pleasure to be your moderator today for this webinar that will launch the OECD report on a territorial approach to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we'll start in a few seconds with some welcoming remarks and a deep dive into the report finding. A few housekeeping arrangements before we start, just to inform you that we are recording the webinar, which will be made available on our webpage by the end of this week. That this is a webinar format, so the 300 plus registered participants can interact with questions via the chat function. We'll keep an eye on your questions as we progress with the panel and the presentations and make sure we have an opportunity to respond to them throughout these 2 hours. We have, as I said, a number of participants registered. We invite you to communicate throughout the webinar using our OECD _local Twitter handle. You have also on the current PowerPoint slide a number of links to the report on Viken that we are launching today, but also to the data set where you can find a lot more information online. And I really hope you will enjoy this session and get to know more about Norway and SDGs performance overall and the case of Viken in particular. It's my pleasure now to hand over the floor to our Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Ulrik Vestergaard Knudsen, to kick off the webinar and launch the report on Viken. Deputy Secretary General, thank you very much for your presence. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Aziza, and you said good morning to everyone. I think in Norway and Denmark, where I come from, it's maybe too late in the day to say good morning, but a little bit too early to say good afternoon. But hello, everyone. It's very good to be with you. I'm delighted to be here to launch our new report. We call it A Territorial Approach to the SDGs in Viken, Norway. The report is part of a series from 11 pilot cities and regions, and therefore also part of our broader program that we call A Territorial Approach to the SDGs. The goal of this program is to support cities and regions to develop, to implement, and to monitor strategies to deliver on all the SDGs. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Ambassador Per Egil Selvak, the permanent representative of Norway, to the OECD for joining us at this launch. He will be providing closing remarks. I'd also like to thank Tonje Brenna. I see you in my screen. Tonje, thank you so much. You're the chair of the County of Government of Viken. Thanks for being with us and for the very great collaborative work between our two teams. And last but not least, I'd also like to thank the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities and the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization for co-hosting this event. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, brings unprecedented challenges to drive sustainable development in both OECD and non-OECD countries. It is, you could say, the third and greatest economic, financial, and social shock of the 21st century, if you count 9/11 as the first one and the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9 as the second one. It's a shock that brings a halt in production in affected countries. It hits supply chains across the world with a steep drop in consumption together with a collapse in confidence, and finally also a sharp decline in services that reflects the consequences of lockdowns and social distancing, especially in urban settings. But there's also light at the end of the tunnel. We came out with our interim economic outlook earlier this week, with quite a dramatic upgrading of our economic prognosis for the world economy. We are now looking into a growth of 5.6%. And even though Europe is a little bit slower than the rest of the world, we've also upgraded for Europe. So let's hope that growth is around the corner for Europe, for Norway, and for Viken. Nonetheless, in today's still very uncertain environment, the SDGs are more relevant, we think, than ever, as they offer a clear and stable framework to guide cities, regions, and national governments in shaping a transformative recovery from COVID-19. Critically, we cannot achieve the SDGs without local and regional governments. And why, you may ask, is that so? Well, it's so because across the world, public policies and investments are a shared responsibility across all levels of government. Cities and regions have a key role to play given their core policy prerogatives, from water to housing, transport, infrastructure, land use, and climate change, but also because of their close connection, obviously, to citizens. Within OECD countries, subnational governments account for 40% of total public investment globally, and are also responsible for 64% of environment and climate-related public investment. 5 years since the adaptation of the SDGs, the startling reality, though, is that no country is on track to achieve all the SDGs by 2030, not even Norway, not even Denmark. And this is also true at the subnational level. The OECD localized framework for the SDGs highlights that at least 70% of cities have not achieved the end values in 15 out of 17 SDGs. And at least 80% of regions have not achieved the end values in any of the 17 goals. That's why we started conducting policy dialogues with several cities and regions, including Viken, whose report we launched today. This is, of course, to help cities and regions understand how they perform, where they need to prioritize, and how they can guide decision-making going forward. Turning to the Viken report, I'd like to highlight 3 important messages that have emerged from the policy dialogue with Viken, as well as with other pilots of our program. First, regions and cities are using the SDGs as a framework to assess their performance in a range of policy domains and understand their strengths, their weaknesses, their challenges, and their opportunities. The data we have produced show that Viken performs above the average of OECD regions in the majority of the SDGs. Around 41% of the county's population aged between 25 and 66 had successfully completed tertiary education in 2018. That is around 10 percentage points higher than the corresponding average of OECD regions. In 2017, air pollution levels were considerably lower than the WHO air quality guideline value and among the top 25% of OECD regions with the lowest microparticle exposure. And also in Viken, 100% of the electricity production came from renewable sources, mainly hydropower, of course, outperforming the average of OECD regions, which sits at around 41%. But besides these strong performances, important challenges, of course, persist in the county. For instance, uneven growth and spatial inequality between rural areas and urban centers threaten Viken's long-term sustainability. Regarding Viken's labor market, remote areas from Oslo show weaker performance than areas closer to Oslo, not an unknown phenomenon. For instance, in 2019, employment rates in Østfold and Buskerud were lower than in Akershus. Viken's natural environment is subject to pressures from demographic growth and expansion of built-up areas, challenging the preservation of biodiversity. In 2019, only around 10.7% of the area of Viken had a protected status, such as national park or nature reserve, compared to the higher national average, and also compared to the average of OECD regions. They sit at 17.3% and 19.2% respectively. The second important message that has emerged from the policy dialogue is very, very positive news. Cities and regions are actively using the SDGs as a policy-making tool instead of as a compliance agenda, if you like, or just a check-the-box exercise. In Viken, the SDGs have provided a holistic framework to implement a territorial reform where three counties have emerged into one. We have the so-called regional planning strategy for a sustainable Viken 2020-24 and it represents a departure from traditional sector-based planning by leveraging the concept of planetary boundaries to achieve sustainability over time. And the third main message that has emerged is that all levels of governments are leveraging the SDGs to strengthen multi-level governance for sustainability. The Norwegian national government has taken steps to strengthen horizontal and vertical coordination to implement the SDGs. These include an action plan, a coherence forum, and a state secretary committee to promote political coordination and participation to advance the SDGs. Guidance issued by the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization, the so-called KMD, further urges counties and municipalities to integrate the SDGs into their strategic planning. So let me end by saying a little bit about the OECD has helped in all of this. We are very proud to work with the exemplar region of Viken, and I must congratulate you again, Chair of the County Government, for your county's performance. Working with over 100 stakeholders and policymakers from Viken and the Norwegian national government, we used our checklist, we call it the OECD checklist for public action to implement a territorial approach to the SDGs. No more, no less. We used that to develop a set of tailored policy recommendations and ensure a multi-level approach to the SDGs. And I will not bore you with all of it, and I know that it will also be presented in more depth a little bit later. But let me just mention here three recommendations from the report. One, Viken should use the SDGs to adopt a functional approach to ensure balanced regional development. For instance, through smart low-carbon mobility to reduce car dependence, and R&D and cluster policies to create jobs in less dense and rural areas. Two, the formulation of a national action plan for the SDGs provides new impetus to strengthen the involvement of counties and municipalities in policy dialogue with national government. Viken should work further with the national government to mainstream local action into the national SDGs implementation framework, including the voluntary national review. Three, Viken should mobilize private sector support for the SDGs through public procurement and clusters policy. These tools can be used to leverage the critical role that companies can play in decarbonizing the economy and promoting also social inclusion. The role of social enterprises as employers can also be harnessed to enhance social inclusion in the labor market. So, in conclusion, Viken has proved to be really an incredible inspiration for other pilot cities and regions in our program on a territorial approach to the SDGs, as well as to other subnational governments worldwide. Thank you very much for that. And I'd like to thank again Tonje Brenna and her team for the fruitful collaboration that we have enjoyed. I trust this work will be helpful in guiding your new county and regional planning strategy in the years to come. And we at the OECD certainly stand ready to continue supporting you going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, Ulrik Knudsen, for reminding us the key findings and recommendations of this report and how they fit in the OECD's broader work around the action plan on the SDGs and its territorial component in particular. And we'll indeed be hearing from our counterparts in Viken the plans that they have to push forward the implementation of these recommendations. And with no further ado, I now turn to Mrs. Tonje Brenna, the chair of the county government of Viken in Norway. Tonje, we've been working extensively with you and your teams. Thank you very much for the very inclusive and bottom-up process that you've put in place, and you have the floor for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Aziza. Honored Deputy Secretary General, Ambassador, Directors, dear colleagues and friends. I am delighted to once again invite the OECD to Viken, even if we only meet on the screen. But if you were here, you would see that spring is coming to Norway. From I went to bed last night till I got up this morning, we have 50 centimeters more snow only during those few hours. So welcome to Norway and welcome to Viken. I would also like to thank especially Ulrik for the warming words and for also pointing out the things we have done so far that we have a successful score on. Everybody who lives in Scandinavia knows how hard the competition between the Scandinavian countries are. So coming from a Dane, it's especially warming for a Norwegian to receive it. So thank you for the kind words. The Roundtable Conference in November gave us many important and inspiring presentations and messages from all over the world. Today, we will focus on Viken and the excellent report and recommendations you have given us on how to work on the Sustainable Development Goals. We were lucky enough to join the OECD project, a territorial approach to the SDGs, as one of only 9 pilots in 2018. And now, look how the world has changed since then. Of course, the most visible change here today is that the COVID-19 situation has changed the way we live and we work, and the way we work. And I wish we could have the face-to-face meetings like we had before, but I also think that technology helps us stay in touch, work together, and see opportunities even though we are in each our country. Another change is that Viken has become a reality. Our county is now about 1 year and 3 months old, and we have been using and implementing many of those systems and policies that in 2018 were only ideas or things that we discussed. They have now become real and become a fundamental part of our new county. And that is something that we are very proud of. And we thank the OECD project for helping us get there and being able to make this a foundation in building the new county. Our participation in the OECD project has played an important part on building Viken's knowledge and understanding for the sustainability goals and what we can do to reach them. And we have been lucky to be able to build this into the foundation, as I said, in our whole new organization. Several of the OECD recommendations in the report point to the importance of multi-level governance and mobilizing and cooperating with other sectors and stakeholders. This has also changed a lot since 2018. Since then, the national level has, to a stronger degree, acknowledged the importance of the local and regional level for reaching the SDGs. They are also now working on a national action plan for sustainability. And I think we should be humble but proud enough to say that that is part of what we have achieved together as countries working together in this big project together, and making also the national government of Norway starting the work on this action plan. There are also, and everywhere in society, in businesses, in voluntary work, in culture, and more people and organizations are also referring to the SDGs. It has become a common language to talk about this and to be concerned with the goals, and that is absolutely necessary. Because even though 2030 is very close, the goals are still very far away. If we are going to create a sustainable future in Viken, we must all participate, contribute, and work together. National, regional, and local governments has a special responsibility to create arenas and systems where this can happen. Viken is ready to take our part of this responsibility, with co-creation as one of our core values. We are grateful for OECD's very useful report on how we can work towards a society where no one is left behind and which respects the planetary boundaries. We in Viken County Council are committed to follow up on your recommendations. We still have a lot to do, but we also have taken some important steps along the way. My wonderful colleagues Christian Tausen and Hilde Reine will talk about this to you later. We know that we need to work together with you, with the youth, with the Ministry of Local Governments, with the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities, and other actors at all levels and in all sectors. With shared resources and good partnerships, we hope to create a sustainable Viken towards 2030. Thank you very much for your attention and have a great seminar.
Thank you very much, Tonje Brenna, Chair of the County Government of Viken in Norway. Norway. Thank you very much for the excellent cooperation and also for your commitment to make the best possible use of the report and make sure it doesn't end in a shelf and it's guiding your future decision making. And we'll have a panel in a few minutes that will take us through the who does what and how in the short and medium term. Before I turn to Stefano Marta, who is leading the OECD work on a territorial approach to the SDGs and who's the mastermind behind this report and many other case studies in particular, I would like to start a first poll to engage with the 200 plus participants who are connected online. And I would like to invite all the participants. The panelists cannot participate in the poll, so I'll ask you to bear with us for this one, and invite all the other participants to respond to this question. How can cities and regions best use the SDGs as a tool for policy making? And you can choose up to 3 options. You could, of course, tick all these boxes. First, to design and implement local policies, plans and strategies. Second, to manage trade-offs across different policy domains. Third, to prioritize local investment and allocate budget according to the SDGs. Fourth, to align priorities, incentives, and objectives across levels of government, upper and lower levels of government. And last but not least, to engage citizens and stakeholders in policy making. I will leave you a good 10, 15 more seconds. I'm keeping an eye on the numbers and see we already have 100 responses, about half of the audience. So let's wait a few more seconds and invite you to take part to this, take part in this poll that will shape the conversation going forward, and some of the more specific findings and recommendations that Stefano Marta will introduce in a minute. So maybe we wait an extra 5-10 seconds, invite all of you to finalize your voting. And with this, I suggest that the team ends the poll and share the results. And as you can see in the screen, option 1, using the SDGs as a means to design and implement local policies, plans, and strategies, followed by, for a good 60% of respondents, a means to engage citizens and stakeholders in place-based policy making, and very close to that, a means for multi-level governance and vertical alignment across levels of government, which are indeed issues we're going to touch upon. Also, some emphasis put by some of you on the relevance for investment prioritization, budget allocation, and some of the trade-offs that we know are intrinsic to the standalone goals. So we'll stop sharing the results. Thank you very much to the team, and thank you all for participating. Let me remind you to drop your questions in the chat. Do not wait for the last half an hour, so that we keep an eye on the questions and stage them throughout the webinar. If you have specific questions for specific speakers, broader questions for the OECD Secretariat, please use the chat function. And I now turn to Stefano Marta. Stefano will be taking us through some of the detailed findings of this Viken's report in 10 minutes. And then we'll have a panel discussion with different stakeholders from Viken and Norway in terms of the how to make these recommendations happen. And we'll hear from each of them. Stefano, you have the floor.
Thank you, Aziza. It's really my pleasure to present the key findings, briefly present the key findings of the report and the policy dialogue with Viken. I think for us, this policy dialogue was really key to understand how a local government can use the SDGs as a tool to implement a territorial reform. We can go to the next slide. When we started this policy dialogue, actually Viken didn't exist. So we were working with the joint board of political leaders of Akershus, Buskerud and Østfold. The Viken countries was created only in January 2020. And what was impressive since the beginning, it was the commitment of all the political leaders of the three countries to use the SDGs to merge the three counties. Currently, you can see the map. Viken is the most populous county in Norway with 23.4% of the population, and it includes 51 municipalities. And I think what is really interesting is, again, first how to use the SDGs to create a common Viken, only one country out of the four, and also to merge, to make the municipality work together. But also the strong commitment of both Viken was to use the SDGs for the regional planning strategy and for all the plans and programs of the new countries. And we can go to the next slide. In particular, the Viken Regional Planning Strategy 2020-2024 is strongly based on the SDGs, and in particular is based on this conceptual framework of the World Sustainable Development Report 2019 that identifies some key 6 entry points and 4 levers to achieve the 5 long-term goal of Viken. This is really interesting because it's also promoting a multi-sectoral approach to the planning strategy in Viken. And it's also important because Viken is now in the process of selecting some cross-sectoral regional plans for the implementation of the regional planning strategies. Next, another very important factors of Viken is the data component of the SDGs, because being a new country, Viken didn't have a knowledge a data set to inform the policy making. So a big effort of the countries was to create the so-called knowledge base, that is an extensive data set that is currently helping the countries to define the regional planning strategy, to implement the regional planning strategy. And this was also very useful for the OECD because we can go to the next slide. An important component of our policy dialogue are always using the OECD localized indicator framework to identify the development challenges and opportunities in the pilot. And what we did with Viken was probably a bit extra work compared to the other pilots, because we didn't have Viken in our database, being a new county. So we had to combine our data set with the knowledge base that was provided by Viken. And this was extremely useful for us to identify which are the key strengths and challenges of the counties. Some of them were already mentioned by the Secretary General, so I will be very brief on this section, but I would just like to mention that the key strengths that are emerging from the analysis are that poverty reduction is one of the key strengths, health, education, unemployment, the level of pollution, and this factor that 100% of the electricity is coming from renewable sources. At the same time, some of the challenges that still remains are the high share of part-time employment, the gender gap in part-time employment, the waste production, and then high number of motor road vehicles. If we go to the next slide, we can see that we organize our analysis, and you can find this also in the report, around the 5 Ps of the UN. In terms of people, Viken is performing very well in terms of poverty reduction, because the population living below the 60% of the national median disposable income is less than half the average rate of OECD region. In terms of health, infant, children, and traffic mortality rates are among the lowest of OECD region. And in terms of education, is another important strength of Viken. More than 40% of Viken population between 25 and 66 years old have successfully completed tertiary education. In terms of, if you go to the next slide, other important, in the dimension planet, we can see both strengths and some challenges for the countries of Viken. The key strengths are that Viken has a high share of water bodies compared to the other OECD region, and also 57% of the area falls under the category of forest. But the challenges are, as already mentioned, the high rate of motor road vehicles that are 56%, 56 motor road vehicles registered per 100 people, compared to 40 in OECD average, and also the waste production is higher than the OECD average. In terms of prosperity, if you go to the next slide, we can see that, next slide. In prosperity, we can see that a big achievement is the low unemployment rates and the air pollution. The air pollution in Viken is lower than the WHO guidelines and is among the top 25% of the OECD region, and the unemployment rates are very low. And finally, for the dimension peace and prosperity, we can see that on the next slide, we can see that Viken is a very safe place to live with a very low homicide rate, that is 0.5. And also other important indicators are the voter turnout in the last national election were higher than the OECD average. And finally, an indicator that we are using to measure SDG 17, that is the access to the broadband internet. 88% of the households in Viken has access to the internet compared to the 74% of the OECD. In the next slide, I will analyze also how the SDGs can be used by the counties of Viken and by the national government more broadly to improve the multi-level governance in the country. And here we have two very important factors. From the one end, was, as already mentioned by Tonje and the DSG, there are many actions that the national government is taking to strengthen the vertical coordination to implement the SDGs. There is the action plan, the coherence forum, the key role that the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization is playing now to coordinate the implementation of the SDGs in Norway. And another very important document is that was actually approved when we were during our first mission in Viken is the expectation document. It was approved by the Minister of Local Government and Modernization. This is a key document because it's basically suggesting and is basically providing guidance to local and regional government to implement the SDGs in their local strategy and planning. The other key component of the potential use of the SDGs is that they can help the county of Viken to implement a functional approach to reduce disparities between the urban area around Oslo and the most remote rural areas. But also they can be used both by Viken and also by the Norwegian government to address the institutional fragmentation that we realize is one of the challenges that creates some issue for sustainable development. And in particular here, the issue is that sometimes there is an overlap and a mismatch in terms of boundaries between the state agency, the regional state authorities, and the counties and municipalities. And this creates some overlaps in terms of competencies for some key sector of sustainable development. And the idea of promoting a functional approach to the SDGs can help also to improve the coordination on this area. Next slide. Here we also, as already mentioned, the regional planning strategy for Viken was very participatory. I will just mention an important factor that is very peculiar for Viken is the role of the Youth Council. And we saw that the Youth Council in Viken play really a very important role because they can have direct access to the politicians, so they can raise some issues that are important either for the youth or also for sustainable development more in general. And we heard from the youth that they feel that they are really listened by the local politician. In my last slide, I will present the 8 recommendations that will be discussed a bit more in depth in the panel. The first, that was already mentioned by the DSG, is the idea of promoting this functional approach to address the territorial disparity in Viken and also some specific challenges related to public transport, housing, and industry cluster policy. The second one, more on governance, is to secure adequate convening power and resources to the newly created SDG coordination mechanism within the government of Viken. The recommendation 2, 3 and 4 are on multi-level governance, and they are suggesting to engage Viken to engage in dialogue with the national government and also with the other Norwegian counties to share their experiences and knowledge on how to advance the SDGs in Norway. And the fourth one is very much on work further with the national government to mainstream the local action into the national SDG framework, in particular the voluntary national review. And there will be a discussion also on how to coordinate voluntary national review and voluntary local reviews. Then we have some recommendation on how to use this knowledge base that is a huge amount of data that was developed by the county of Viken. So the idea is that this big amount of data should be used also to build the new narrative of the new county of Viken and to tell a story about, to create the vision of Viken, to tell a story about Viken. And also the knowledge base can be used to measure and identify the synergies between competing targets on the SDGs. The seventh one is to raise further awareness about the SDGs with the civil society and to continue this stakeholder engagement process. And finally, last recommendation is on the important role of the private sector. This is already engaged in the SDGs, but there are some specific tools like public procurement or cluster policy that the county can use to further engage the private sector in the implementation of the SDGs. I will stop here and I give the floor to Aziza, and I really look forward to the discussion in the panel.
Thank you very much, Stefano, and those were really crystal clear strength and rooms for improvement for Viken that came out of the report, data and evidence-based, and will be for sure food for thought to the Viken administration and partners and stakeholders in shaping or advancing the SDG agenda going forward. It's now time to turn to the panel, and I would like to thank those of you that have already dropped a number of questions on the chat, excellent questions related to the data, the indicators, the targets that were set, to some of the obstacles or instruments for multi-level governance that stem from urban policies. There are a number of questions that relate also to priorities in the post-COVID world, and we keep an eye on these, and some of our panelists also see these questions as they pop in and may either respond during their brief intervention, or we'll have a moment in between where we can dive more specifically into your questions. So please continue to drop questions. We have close to 230 participants online now, so that we can have a good iteration in the next phase. So let me now turn to the panel, and we have lined up really excellent stakeholders who all have a strong lever in making change happen, in going the extra mile, in supporting the implementation of these recommendations, and I'll introduce them one by one. We'll have 2 rounds of discussion. They will each have a good 3 minutes to respond to a specific question that goes to what they can do individually and as an institution to support the implementation of some of these recommendations. And it's my pleasure to start now with our first panelist, Mr. Christian Tausen, who's the county director at the Viken's governing mayor's office. Christian, it's been a year, as it was said earlier, since the county was created out of this merger, these territorial reforms of 3 different counties, and you've been very successfully using the SDGs, as was said, to shape the common vision for this new county. What do you see 1 year later as being the main achievements in that cooperation across levels of government and former entities within the Viken county?
Thank you, Cisa. And since am I on? Yeah.
Yes,
since I'm first out, let me use this opportunity to thank the OECD and especially you and Stefano for supporting and collaborating with us. We appreciate the partnership and we look forward to work with this. Before I go into the question, I just want to make a quick comment about the opening remarks, because Ulrik painted a fairly broad picture of challenges. And I truly believe that the key to solution of a lot of these challenges actually are to be faced at the regional and the local level. The government can use legislation, but the ones that really have to implement this and do the change is their local level. So this is why this work is so important, and we embrace this. Well, back to the answer. And from what I can see, the report pretty much match how we want to work with the SDGs in Viken. For us to succeed, it's imperative that the work is based on a holistic and a cross-sectoral and multi-level approach. And as challenging as that might sound, because let's not kid ourselves, that is challenging. We think we have taken some important and crucial steps in the right direction the last year, despite the huge strain the corona situation has put on the organization. I want to answer a question on the main achievement by starting a bit somewhere else, not on the holistic and multi-level, but on the organization side. And I want to give you a short background on what we as an organization have done internally. And I think that's the best way to go through this. And the SDG is now a foundation for everything the county council does. That means every part of the organization has responsibility to implement the SDGs. And it's a particular responsibility for all the leaders. And just an example, maybe an important one, but it's just a small example of how we work. We're just now implementing in all political decision documents a sustainability assessment. So basically, everybody is adopting a way of thinking in everything we do. And that's part of a cultural change. And this is also important because, as history has shown, and many before us have experienced, when implementing new ways of doing things, it dwindles away if not owned by the top management and are not supported by actual change in the organization. To counterpart this, we also made the governing mayor's office the owner of the SDGs. So it's on the top of the organization that officially runs this. And it was also important to integrate the SDGs in the regional plans, which Hilde Reine will talk more about, I think. And finally, the Vice Mayor's Office for Finance and Administration has responsibility to keep our own internal budgets and reports in line with the SDGs and our priorities. And also, as OECD mentions in the report, we have established an internal sustainability network. The network consists of some 30 sustainability ambassadors, which are staff and mid-level managers. And they can pick up challenges and wishes across the organization and not in their own sector, and use this platform to develop new tools and also teach other parts of the organization. And we're now in the process of finalizing the network's mandate. Daniel will talk a bit later also about another great example of how we have worked across different sectors and levels internally to establish a strategy to support sustainable procurements. So I'll look forward to that. To what you really were asking, and I'm going to land this now, engage in dialogue across levels of government. We are now in the process of becoming part of the National Sustainability Network for municipalities and counties with the Association of Norwegian Local and Regional Authorities. We believe we can learn from the experiences and innovative approaches from the frontrunners here. And we also think we can add valuable information and knowledge back to the network through this work and other works we have done. And we really need to truly work against a common goal. So that's why this network will be important. We also have been recommended to support municipalities. And I want to emphasize that working toward the SDGs is not possible without the municipality level. Since we are the largest region, we have 51 municipalities, various sizes, population, opportunities. So we work with them every day on various SDGs initiatives. At the same time, I think right now, and this is important to say, we need to recognize the strain the pandemic have put on the municipalities. So when looking at the progress here, we could, of course, want to be further, but this is a situation that I think hit Norway pretty hard, as well as the rest of Europe. But we hope we can host a joint conference for mutual learning and sharing by the end of May. And if the COVID situation around Viken allows it, we will also propose a sustainability network for Viken municipalities, which is a really low threshold joining system. So working both internally and with our partners, it's hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Christian. It does indeed, and thank you for recalling the place-based nature of the challenges that municipalities and counties are facing in Norway, but also the place-based responses that they can provide. And I think the examples you gave in terms of engaging with upper and lower levels and facilitating this dialogue through the different mechanisms and platforms that you shared are extremely enlightening. Let me now turn to Daniel Tabacaru, who is a senior advisor of climate-friendly procurement. This is a nice way to point to the green component of procurement, public procurement in the county of Norway. And indeed, Daniel, some of these issues were introduced in the remarks of Christian, but it's true that when we are trying to figure out how to unlock the potential of many transitions that are underlying some of the sustainable development goals, one of the major bottlenecks that is always put forward by local governments, SMEs, the private sector at large is public procurement, and how public procurement is sufficiently agile and flexible to accommodate other considerations than the cheapest bid. And I'm sure you've been dealing with many of these issues. So how do you think public procurement can contribute to achieving some of the SDGs in Viken, and going back to the references that were made earlier about the potential to leverage more public investment and allocate more budget at the county level in the years to come? Daniel, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you for being part of this this panel. In Viken County, there has been a focus on using the public procurement as a tool to achieve the carbon footprint targets that have been decided by the politicians. So specifically in our working group, part of the climate department, my colleagues have developed a methodology of increasing the number of fossil-free vehicles, for example, used both by the public sector, but also by the local transport companies, taxis. But before the public procurement process, there has been a mapping of the user behavior and needs to lower the barriers in choosing EVs, for example. As we know, sometimes in adopting change, the biggest challenge is not the technical solution, but the perception and the will to change from the user perspective. So after showing the user that actually the EVs could fulfill the range requirements, for example, it is much easier to focus on the cost benefits analysis in the usage phase. As a result, we have an example from Østfold. One of the local taxi companies have committed to changing the entire 42 cars that they use today to electrical and biogas driven alternatives already by 2023. But something that was very interesting in this process was that my colleagues have chosen to use something called dynamic contracts. And that is something that allows the best available products to be chosen not at the time of the contract, but at the time of the delivery. And especially when you're talking about a rapidly evolving EV market, it was possible to have delivered much better product specification by also helping the supplier to look for better alternatives to fulfill the original requirements. The same approach has been used to frame the public procurements for heavy construction equipment with zero local emissions. Here, the approach was ask for the best available solution and be part of creating a market for such products by using the public procurement tools. In our projects, we have focused on the SDGs 11, 12, and 13, but maybe the key was SDG 17, the cooperation one. The cooperation, multi-sectoral, and cross-disciplinary work was the key in achieving all this. And I think that is, personally, is my favorite. Another area that we're focusing in our group are the buildings, the so-called 40% sector. because of the energy footprint and the carbon footprint. Our focus is specifically on materials and infrastructure projects, but we try to get in as early in the process from the feasibility studying and mapping the needs of the project and to continue until the public procurement. And what we do, because we are at the county level, we balance between learning from previous projects and implementing innovative approaches. And like this, we can identify both the best points in time to shape the process, but also what has the best return of investment on the long term. So by choosing better solutions and better quality, we can extend the life of the buildings. We can achieve a substantial carbon footprint reduction by lowering, for example, the need for new materials and new buildings. So we look holistically at how we can use the public procurement. And the SDGs, I think that they offer a great framework to coordinate and work towards achieving what the 1984 Norwegian initiated Brundtland report called Our Common Future. And I would add it, our sustainable common future. So we use the SDGs as a framework in framing our public procurement processes.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Very interesting, and those references to the best available products, but also very concrete illustrations from different sectors that we know are key for this ecological transition that is expected in the cities and counties' efforts to build back better. Let me now turn to our third panelist, and it's my pleasure to introduce Hilde Reine, County Director of Planning, Climate and the Environment. And Hilde, again, after a year of existence, I'd like to ask you also from an environmental standpoint and regional planning strategy standpoint, where you think you stand with advancing that new vision for the county after the territorial reform, and how the goals have helped you in practice.
Thank you, Sisa. And as Christian also did, give you a big thank to you, Sisa and Stefano, for providing us with a report with well-argued recommendation on how to implement a territorial approach to the SDGs in Viken. As Viken is a new administrative entity, it gives us a range of different challenges, advantages, and possibilities, and as also the Deputy Secretary General showed us, and Stefano too. The OECD recommendations that ask us to promote a functional approach to address the Viken's key development challenges with respect to example transport, housing, and economic development in order to ensure a balanced economy development in all of the territory, I will say it is essential. And as you also point out, that this also raises the awareness of the importance of intermunicipal collaboration for strategic planning to align policies in responding to key challenges. The Viken County adopted the regional planning strategy in December 2020. And if you remember on the roundtable in Paris in 2019, I called this the mother of all plans. And it seems that we will succeed with that. So far, it looks very good to say that. Because in the regional planning strategy, we have introduced 6 entry points, as Stefano showed, as a productive way of ensuring the holistic and cross-sectoral implementation to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think this is a major achievement that has proved to be a successful way of describing the territorial context of Viken. Another achievement that I will say we have reached is to we decided that some of the themes are so important that they must weigh heavily in all planning work that results from the regional planning strategy. And here comes the mother of all plans too. Climate and environment, public health, and cooperation are ever-present issues that must be included in all of the regional plans following. And we can observe that the use of such cross-cutting themes are now also being applied in planning at the local level. A major challenge that still remains is to ensure an uptake of the Sustainable Development Goals at all levels of governments and across all sectors, in a way that secures synergies and avoid trade-off between different priorities and SDG goals. We believe that one solution here could be to keep a functional focus, as mentioned by the OECD, and it's part of the recommendation, where we focus on the different development trends instead of limiting ourselves by constraints set by traditional sectoral approach. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilde, and for recalling this cross-cutting nature and the role of that new regional development plan as a master plan that connects the dots rather than acts as a substitute to the planning systems that exist at more granular level. And I think this was indeed the recipe for success, and we look forward to knowing more. Let me now turn to our next panelists, and it's my pleasure now to invite Ronja Borgemyr to step in. Ronja from the Viken Youth Council. There were a few references made to that important consultation platform in the previous conversations, and we know that with COVID-19 in particular, youth are going to be and are already particularly hit by the social, economic, and environmental consequences of the pandemic, and have already in Viken at least been quite front runners in raising the awareness of decision makers and making sure that accountability is shed on how to push the SDGs agenda forward. So I'd like to ask you, Ronja, what are, according to you, some of the important steps to be taken for the youth to be part of that achievement goal for the Sustainable Development Goals, and how you are working in practice within the Youth Council on that front?
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I've been a member of Youth Council since the fall of 2018, so I've been through a couple of runs and cases and been through all of the Viken, both the planning and follow up on creating the Viken Youth Council. So we work a lot with SDGs, as you said, and we use the SDGs whenever we're giving feedback or remarks on cases that we're given by the government of the county. But I think it's more than that. I think it's that we are present, and as said earlier, we're listened to by our peers. So I think that whenever we take SDGs as a point of view on something, I think we show that all the youth around the county that the SDGs are not only for the politically interested youth. I think it's more than that, bringing the people that are just on the edge of really contributing to reaching the goals and bringing them into the knowledge and giving them the power to succeed. We are a group of people that are in the face of making really big decisions that are going to affect our lives. We're making decisions on what kind of education we want to partake in and much more. I think that getting the innovation that youths have naturally and combining that with educators, educating and educators that we're surrounded by at all times, I think that we'll be able to bring up a lot of solutions. And I think that the Youth Council really putting that out there and really showing that it's not up to a tight-knit group of people like the OECGs to reach the goals alone, but also to each and every one of us. So I think that for us to have a space to come up with solutions and making sure our way to the top, where we're listened to and where we're really mobilizing each and every one of our qualities, I think that's really a part of what we're doing, that's really showing us how we can work together on this.
Thank you very much, Ronja, and for really your dynamism. And we very much believe at the OECD that governance is not only about governments. And I think what stakeholder groups like youth and others do to advance these goals is really strategic going forward because of that shared responsibility that many of you have pointed to. Let me now turn to our next panelist, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jesper Tangenes Bæverfjord. Jesper, apologies if I didn't get it completely right. You're a senior advisor within the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization of Norway. You've been really a key player setting the right incentives to work across levels of government within that ministry. Jesper, if you can tell us a bit more about the latest updates from the ministry, how you're engaging into the voluntary national review of Norway, and how do you see this as a process that could potentially raise the profile of subnational governments and strengthen that multi-level governance? Jesper, you have the floor.
Thank you for the kind introduction. First of all, I would like to thank OECD and Viken for organizing this webinar and panel discussion. I would also like to give a special thank to you, Aziza, for excellent moderation so far, and don't worry, you were very close on my name. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and it is really inspiring for us in the ministry to see such high engagement from our local and regional partner in the work for a sustainable future. And we are particularly delighted to see that the issue of multi-level engagement on the SDGs are put on the agenda, as we see it as a key to advance on the goals of Agenda 2030. The Ministry of Local Government and Modernization has a leading role in the development of Norway's VNR this year. This is new, as the previous VNR was conducted primarily by the Foreign Ministry, and also, like in general, we have moved around responsibility for the sustainability work between the ministries recently. So all in all, the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization has a much bigger stake in this than we did only a year ago. And while the Foreign Ministry is not heading the report this year, they're still a very close partner and contributing especially in the global aspects of the report. And I think actually it's a very good thing that we have gotten the responsibility in my ministry, because we are in actually a unique position to facilitate multi-level engagements on the SDGs. First of all, like we have already a white paper that we're working on with an action plan, and it's been going on for a year or so already. So it's quite a fortunate thing for us, because we have already conducted a lot of consultation, stakeholder meetings, lots of webinars. We even managed to have some physical ones last year. This year, unfortunately, as we know, everything is online, and yeah, the COVID situation is, of course, proving it's more difficult on some levels, but on other levels, I think this digitalization of consulting has made actually us able to involve a much broader set of stakeholders. And so everything is not all doom and gloom, and also with regard to the report itself, the COVID situation has maybe made us a little bit delayed in our work, but I think that's also a common trend for everyone this last year. But that also means that we are working very intensely now, and yeah, so we're leading the work on the VNR in Norway right now, and the focus is on the national situation and how have we progressed since 2016 was, which was when we had our first report to the UN. And that's also why we, in particular, are working with the Ministry, the Norwegian Association for Local and Regional Authorities. Because my ministry, we also have a broad set of cooperation with the association already, and this year we have entered into a bit more of a formal arrangement for working on the sustainability in general, and particular on the local VNR and also the national VNR. So we're very happy for that. The close cooperation with the association gives us a lot more input, and also a good partner to discuss a wide range of issues in this work. So I think I will leave it for that for now, and talk more about this cooperation in the second question.
Thank you so much, Jesper, and many thanks to all of you for the very active chat. We have plenty of questions. We'll go through the next two panelists, and then we'll pause a little bit to respond to some of your questions in the chat. So let me now introduce the next panelist, Anne Romsas, Chief Advisor for SDGs in the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities. We've been working also extensively with you throughout the policy dialogue, and are really grateful for your engagement to engage basically beyond Viken a broad range of local and regional governments in Norway. Tell us more about your network, what it's doing vis-a-vis the SDGs, and how you are raising the profile of local action as part of this VNR 2021 process as well.
Thank you, Aziza, and dear participants and dear friends, I must say now, because we have taken great pleasure in being a part of this OECD project and working with the Viken in this project. And it's so interesting now to read the recommendation and hear also this discussion. And as we heard now from Jesper in the ministry, Norway will present a national voluntary review this summer. And that is such a good possibility to showcase the multitude of work that's been done in Norway to achieve the SDGs. And as we know, the SDGs affect all aspects of local government sector's work. The UN itself has estimated that 2/3 of the 169 sub-goals can only be achieved with the active involvement of the local government sector. And we are therefore working to mobilize the development of local reviews from municipalities and regional authorities in Norway, because we think that the VLRs can contribute to raise awareness to the need in hand and to showcase the knowledge on localization and achievements that are being made in the local and regional authorities. Like Christian said earlier, the local and regional authorities are so important when it comes to the work on the SDGs. And Guide, that's coming after me, will give more insight to the VLR process that they are doing in Asker municipality. And in order to strengthen local and regional voices in the national review process, KS has determined to develop a voluntary sub-national review. This VSR will offer a countrywide bottom-up sub-national reporting process on the state of localization on the SDGs in Norway. And it covers all SDGs and principles, and it follows a structured design from the UNDESA guidelines. We are conducting a nationwide survey now with Deloitte. We analyze achievements and performance through KPIs, and we are also collecting relevant cases. And in Norway, we experience the benefit of collaboration across tiers of governments, and KS maintains a close dialogue with the Ministry of Local Government, like Jesper just told. Through fruitful dialogue, we have reached an agreement on collaborating to align the national and sub-national reviewing process, and we are now working to produce a dedicated chapter in the VNR on SDG localization and local and regional progress on SDGs. And we have also just received the confirmation from the Minister of Foreign Affairs that KS is included in the Norwegian delegation to the high-level political forum in 2021. And we think this is just great news on how to showcase and really give the local and regional level the honor it deserves in this process. We also collaborate closely with our international network and national stakeholders with the ambition to better share knowledge and experience it through the reporting process. And as we speak, There's an international workshop hosted by our world organization, UCLG, to foster collaboration between all the countries that are producing subnational reviews. And I think it almost speaks for itself. I think collaboration is really the key for the way forward in this work. And it's so interesting to listen to Viken's experiences and see how we can use the Viken experiences to share to the rest of the municipalities and regions in all of Norway and also internationally.
Great, thank you very much. And this is very interesting because we've seen over the past 5 years, on the one hand, voluntary national reviews, then a plethora of voluntary local reviews where cities and regions themselves put forward their region and city specific. And now it's interesting to see your initiative to have a single review that looks at all the performance of subnational governments and that can really convey this granular data that we need beyond the city specific and basically connect the dots with the national voluntary review process. Interesting development. Thank you very much for that. And last but not least, I'm now turning to our last panelist, Geir Graaf, innovation strategist in the Asker municipality of Norway. So one of the municipalities in the county, and I will invite you, Geir, to tell us also from the local level what you see as the successful practices and maybe some of the possible gaps in this process of conveying how municipalities are performing and resources they need to achieve these goals.
Thank you very much, Aziza, and thank you for arranging this workshop. For the sake of time, I will make this short, but Asker municipality is sort of a new municipality. The regional and municipal reform that landed, as if we can use that expression, last year, made Asker the 8th largest municipality of Norway. And we were actually able to use the SDGs as the platform to build the new municipality on. This is, of course, at the heart of our process this year of making a VLR, a voluntary local review. And we believe that in our municipal services, we daily meet with the citizens, the NGOs, the businesses, and other parties. We have day-to-day dealings with them related to sustainable societal development. So therefore, in the context of today's meeting, we like to present ourselves as the level of government that definitely should possess the knowledge of how things are working on the ground. We believe that this viewpoint is of the essence when it comes to know how the world really works, so to speak, and how the work with achieving the SDGs really is progressing on the practical level. So I do not mean to overstate the role of the municipal level of government, but we firmly believe that we play an essential part in this work with both the subnational and the national reporting, because both the VSRs and the VNRs, they should consist of the aggregated knowledge from the local levels of government. And in this work, we believe that we as municipalities, we could act as, you can say, listening posts, because we constantly have our ears to the ground to listen into the local needs, the local challenges, and also the local solutions to different issues related to sustainable development. It's therefore with great pleasure, actually, that we experience to be an active part of this dialogue between the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities, KS, that is represented by Anne, and the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization, KMD, represented by Jesper. Working with our VLR, we are experiencing that we are working in parallel with KS to give both input to the methodology and the design of the VSR, that they in turn can use as a basis for the cooperation with KMD on the VNR. So in that way, we actually believe that we now are achieving this dynamic flow of information through the different levels of government that is absolutely necessary to give, we can say, an honest insight into the state of affairs concerning how Norway delivers on the SDGs as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Extremely interesting to have this bottom-up feedback on how multi-level governance is performing and the practicalities that you've put in place to make this work. Let us now pause for a second because I have received so many questions. I would like, before we get into the poll, to give a chance to some of the panelists to address some of them. So we have a question that is straightforward for you, Ronja. Therefore, I'll start with you. Very interesting feedback on how youth is working so hard to make these SDGs deliver. And the question is, what do you think is needed to engage more systematically with youth? Someone was dropping in the chat, a government that doesn't have youth is not a government, especially outside your particular territory. And what do you think are the greatest successes in terms of platforms or other ways to influence basically consultation and government processes? Maybe Ronja, I'll start with you if you wish to elaborate a bit more on these two aspects.
Yes, of course. So I think first off, we need to just make it clear that there is no magical potion or a formula that's perfect for engaging youth or having a perfect platform. But I think it's really about customizing what works for your municipality or your country or your county or whatever kind of area you're working with. I think there's always going to be really engaged youth like myself and my my people that are in my council, but also I think it's really important that just the knowledge that there are somewhere to go if you have an idea, or just bringing the openness and bringing room into your type of governance for youth to bring forward their ideas. So I think that's really just the way to go. And when youth know something, all youth know it. It's kind of this thing that's going on. We're spreading a lot of information and acknowledgements about our reality to each other. So if somebody knows it, everybody knows it. And if somebody has an idea, it will come forward. So just be open and show to the world that you are open. I think that's the most important part.
Very insightful. Thank you very much, Ronja, and also to Lourdes for asking the question. I have a next question for you, Danielle, regarding the cost-benefit analysis that you were mentioning, which is considered the valuable experience and example. And the question is whether such analysis come from the public sector or are produced out of partnership processes, and if you can share a bit more details on these aspects and how they guide basically the commitments of the different actors for achieving the goals. Danielle?
Yes, that's a very good question. Our approach is that in public procurement, we are the one that require different products. So we try to look towards connecting the investment and the maintenance, for example. So when we take the cost analysis, we look on the longer term and we try to create the premises for better quality and to include, lately we started to focus on the circular economy principles that actually look in a much more holistic way to our investments and how we can frame the public procurement, like having focus, for example, on the maintenance and repairability and so on. So we, as the one that sit on the side of the one that decide what is going to happen, we try to create the frame, but of course it has to be realistically to get there to get it in practice. So we work together with the private sector also, but we decide the frame on the long term.
And I think that responds to a question that was asked also by Asiat on how to achieve sustainability in private sector and whether you've organized special processes for that. Maybe you can speak a bit more to this.
Yes, I will come back to that in the second part because I think there will be a discussion connected to that.
Okay.
So
we'll keep this for the second round. Thank you very much. There's a question, a number of questions actually that relates to the more data / indicators component. Some of them inquire why we're not using survey indicators for evaluating the achievements of Viken. Others are inquiring about why we are comparing with other regions rather than comparing over time. And there's a related question about Viken having set or not quantitative objectives for some of the 169 SDG targets. So maybe Stefano, I can invite you to elaborate briefly on the localized indicator framework and this temporal / country specific dimension and the link to survey-based data out there. And then I invite someone from Viken and maybe Christian, I'll go to you on what kind of quantitative objectives you've set for the target. So Stefano?
Yes, on the point on the survey, I think it's very interesting because what we did is to use both the quantitative data of our localized indicator framework, the quantitative data coming from the knowledge base of Viken, but this was integrated also by some international survey, like the Gallup data, that is this worldwide survey that is capturing perception, for example, the level of corruption in the government or the feeling safe in your country and so on. And this is we use in our indicator framework, but we also had a survey before we started the policy dialogue that we share with the local team and all the stakeholders to collect the more soft information that we use in the report on the policy, the strategy, the multi-level governance. So if you have a look at the report, there is one chapter on their data, but also 2 chapters on policy, strategy, and governance that very much informed by the survey that we share with the local team. And in terms of comparing Viken versus other regions and the time dimension, so now the first step was really to create this indicator framework and identify some peers to develop this comparison. The goal was not, the final goal is not the comparison because it's not important if Viken is doing better than Flanders or Southern Denmark or vice versa, but it's really to use this comparison, this benchmarking to create a policy dialogue among peers. So Viken can understand, for example, if Southern Denmark or Flanders is doing better in 2 or 3 indicators and why, so they can start a policy dialogue on the policy, strategy, and measures, and vice versa. The time dimension is something we are working on in the policy dialogue. Of course, is something that we already look at, but we also have our web tool. And in the web tool, the next step will be to also include some the time dimension and to see how cities and regions are progressing over time in the on the SDGs. So it's a work in progress.
Good, thank you very much, Stefano. Christian, maybe on the question of whether or not you've set up those quantitative targets for the 169 SDGs targets at Viken level?
Yes, I can try to answer that. It's a bit premature to say we have quantitative targets for all the 169 SDG goals. We used the first year now to building the data sets, mapping targets, and it's also a bit premature because we do have targets and plans from the old regions. For instance, we have goals to climate plans and so forth, but they're not all consistent in the new planning system. As Hilde said, we now have a new regional plan. That plan has set out to have action plans and coordinating all this. And the 3 new regional plans that are supposed to be supporting all this, they're not finished or developed, and they're not taken to the political system yet. So I would say we have some targets, but we don't have targets for all the 169 SDGs operational, and it is still a work in progress.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Christian. I'll take two last questions and then we'll get to the poll and we'll have a second very short round with the speakers. And I'll skip the question because I see it's subject to very interesting exchanges in the chat. So written responses have been provided to the questions that relate to the food system and to biogas. And it's really enlightening to read you all, Florence and Karine and Lynn on those issues. My two remaining questions are those. So one is raised by Kevin Collins on the question of spillover effects. And Kevin is saying that he doesn't see any mention to the spillover effects and that on the SDG dashboard, Norway currently stands as number 156 in the spillover index ranking, worse than the US, Germany, Austria, just slightly better than the UK. Were such spillover effects considered for Viken, perhaps compared to the rest of Norway? And I know this is a conversation we had with many of you in some of the workshops talking about the concrete implementation of the planetary boundary concept and some of the trade-offs that need to be managed in terms of this revisiting of production and consumption patterns. So I don't know who wants to bring a beginning of a response to that from Viken's side.
I can.
Anyone? Yes, please go ahead, Daniel.
Briefly, that is part of our approach, and the example that we have specified, the one with the taxis and biofuel and EVs, that was a very good example of public procurement that it is used to have side effects on the local level, because people get acquainted to a new product, and that lowers the risk for others to do the same purchasing decision. And and we're trying to have this spillover effect also across municipalities in Viken, in our group, that we try to take knowledge from an experienced consultant, for example, and transfer it to a smaller municipality that doesn't have the same knowledge. So this spillover effect is quite important. I totally agree.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And then I'll take the last question, which is COVID related. There are a number of questions that ask about what is the difference between ensuring the fulfillment of the SDGs before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic. And we actually have insisted very much that probably mayors and county governors don't wake up in the morning, with the intention to implement the SDGs as the top priorities, but more to fix the underlying issues to the SDGs. But probably with this crisis, priorities have shifted. So may I maybe ask, Christian, would you like to say a few things about that? And then I'd be interested to hear from the Norwegian also Association of Local and Regional Authorities, your broader view on whether you still have this momentum or you feel the crisis is distracting a bit the attention from the underlying policy concerns for each goals. Christian?
Yeah, I can try. I think you have to look at this two ways. The pandemic is something we have to live with. But in Viken, we have chose the SDG as a sort of an organizational standpoint. So that's how the whole organization is built. We use it in the values, the vision, how we work, how we write the papers. Even during the pandemic, we are watching how that actually affects our decisions. So when we put forward political documents now, we still look to what will this do with the SDGs, no matter the pandemic or not. I would say the one thing the pandemic is doing is, of course, it puts an enormous strain on the organization. So our capacity to do the base work that we are supposed to is lower. And of course, a region like Viken, which has probably 25–30% of the commuters in the whole of Norway, and bus companies and everything, we do have organizational issues, but it doesn't stop the cultural turnaround using the SDGs. And I think I don't think we should compare those two problems. Basically, what the problem the SDG is trying to solve is actually pandemics are, if you look further down through the goals of the SDGs, pandemic is connected to health, vaccine is connected to health. It's just interlinked with the whole problems we try to solve in the world. So we're trying not to make the one hurt the other. But of course, some development projects has had to be put a bit on hold just because of management resources. But I would say rather than that, we try to go forward as it's two different things.
Very good. Thank you. Anne, would you like to add a bit on that front?
Yes, I can add a bit. I think it's kind of twofolded, because we see that Norway has actually gotten some critique that we have not used now the possibility to shift into a more greener focus, to use now the investment funding to a green shift, etc. We are now actually funding the more traditional businesses and industries that probably not are sustainable. So we have received quite a lot of critics for that. But at the same time, I think we can see that this speedy digitalization that has happened through the pandemic has also made it more possible to engage more like with youth, with the civil society, and to make the SDGs and the need for sustainable shift more apparent to everyone. So it's kind of twofolded, and what we see from the municipality sector is that it has not slowed down the focus on the SDGs. It has maybe brought given it a more fruitful language, maybe, that we need to work towards a resilient and sustainable future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anne. So let's now turn to the poll. We have a second poll to engage the 200 plus of you who are online. We'll use a different software this time. We'll go through Mentimeter. You have different ways of accessing the poll. If you have a smartphone, you just do as I am doing, and you flash basically the code, and we'll see the question appear. You can also, via the chat, copy-paste the information that is provided to you. So you click on the link, menti.com, and then you enter this password number that you see on the screen. And here is the question that you will have to respond to once you get there. Which tools and mechanisms do you deem most relevant to strengthen multi-level governance when it comes to achieving the SDGs? And this is basically just a keyword list. So you can put up to 5 words or combination of words, and we'll let you get started with the survey. And in a few seconds, we'll show you on the screen what the word cloud shows. So now that everybody had a chance to flash or click on the link via the chat, access the question, the 5 different options, we are sharing the screen, and we are seeing progressively some of the keywords you are suggesting in terms of network, dialogue, leadership, co-creation, common indicators, learning. We see a lot of language around cooperation, dialogue, exchange. Leadership also is appearing more and more prominent. Maybe we'll take an extra 5 seconds, but that gives us a good idea of some of the enablers of that multi-level governance in practice. And while we are letting you finalize your inputs, let me now resume a very short, it will be much shorter because we have literally 15 minutes left. So I will be very strict on time and invite our different panelists to add really 2 words on some specifics. And maybe my first goes to you, Christian, if you can react to what you've seen in terms of the tag cloud and options that were suggested for multi-level. Does that echo what you've put in place for Viken and Norway?
The cloud disappeared so fast that I didn't see all the words, but I would say, yes, leadership, cooperation, it's key words. You have to believe in it as a manager or leader of an organization, and then you have to get people to believe in it around you, and then you have to cooperate on all levels. If we don't do this together, we will never succeed. So that was really short, and I think I got some of the keywords.
Very good. Do you feel the tools that you need at the Viken level in particular, because this is a new county and this comes out of a territorial reform and a merger, are all in place to foster that dialogue and leadership, and it's more a question of implementation, or do you see the need to create more of these formal mechanisms going forward?
That's a tough question. I would say a lot of it is in place. We just need to think differently about them, because Norway is an extremely well organized society. So we just need to use all the meeting places we have better. Because just adding new meeting places doesn't really help this. It just makes it more messy. Because if you are to collaborate, you don't want to make so many meeting places or that you get silos. So we do need to develop tools, mechanisms, and meeting places. But I think we should pretty much do it within the structures that we already have.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me now turn back to you, Daniel. And there were a number of questions earlier on public procurement and how this can leverage the private sector contribution. If you can elaborate a bit more on that, and in particular, because we know that public-private partnership will be essential in the recovery packages that are designed and in that green transition that is needed going forward.
I totally agree, and I think that we have to put it into the perspective. In the public sector in Norway, we have 56 billion euros in public procurements every year. And one can easily see the potential and the impact here. So what we are trying to do is, I will focus, to be short, on our selling points, if I can call them like this. So first, we work across the county in a widespread regional area, and we can transfer knowledge across municipalities, helping the smaller ones gain from the experience of the bigger ones, as it was pointed in the recommendation 5 and 6 in the report. And we try to understand the local premises and requirements and budgets, and to find the most sustainable approach based on them. We help also shaping the public procurements with data support regarding carbon footprint. And the last but not the least, according to recommendation 8, we have established a network together with partners that have the same focus on the SDGs, the bioeconomy region and the woods consultants, and we are able to better understand and recommend local sustainable solutions for the existing or new buildings. So we try to connect the local suppliers with the requirements, and that has a lot of side effects on the transportation, the carbon footprint and maintenance, long-term job creations, and so on. We need data in our daily life more and more, and what we work with in our group is to analyze the impact of the emissions, both the direct local emissions and non-direct manufacturing and transport, by using life cycle assessment and life cycle cost tools. Like this, we can look into a more holistically and objectively way to the alternatives, both area, functional, materials, and so on in the buildings. What we have noticed is that we have a lot of data, but for the moment it is placed in isolated vertical structures in different departments. So we in Viken try to strengthen the vertical and horizontal coordination in using data across the entire county. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think that we have a lot of premises in place. So we're on the right track.
Thank you very much, Danielle. And let me now turn back to Hilde. Hilde, you mentioned earlier the mother of all plans. And as a planning director, I'd like to ask you how you see the 3 broad and inclusive plans for Viken being connected going forward to improve the territorial dialogue and this regional implementation of the 2030 agenda.
Ooh, yeah, we are doing something we never done before. We are these 3 plans will be developed at the same time. Normally, we develop one at the time, but now we are going to do all the 3 at the same time, because we think that it's because it's difficult to uphold it's important to do the discussions, have the process at the same time in parallel, because it's difficult for especially the municipalities, because also the organization, the private sector, it's difficult if we have lots of processes discussing regional and local development at the same time. So we try to focus and try to see how what is it, a process at the same time, how this can be addressed in the correct plan. Which one of the plans should we address different questions? And as I mentioned, the environment, climate and public health should oh, I lost the words. We have to look through and take care of the environmental and the social aspects in all 3 plans at the same time. And the regional planning is a very good way of us to develop the partnership with the society. So yeah, let's keep it that so far.
Absolutely, thank you very much. And I think going back to the poll that was done earlier, the potential of this planning system to manage the trade-offs
Yes.
across different policy domains comes up very prominently at local level. May I ask Ronja, maybe back to you, what is your engagement with this planning system? Are you through the youth council consulted, engaged in any of these 3 broad and inclusive plans for Viken? And if not, what are your plans to ensure this is the case going forward?
Well, okay, so every time that the county government has a case, we're able to put in our inputs and tell them what we mean about the case. So that's really one way that we're really contributing to getting youth's opinion listened to. And also, we're in this resource group. We have the ability to promote people from us to another external resource group that gives input like on another level with other youths. So that's really how we're doing it. One of the things that we've really noticed is really important is bringing the youth up to speed, because a lot of things that adults take for granted, like job markets or tax legislation or anything like that, we don't really know that. Or if we're talking about cars and roads, I don't drive a car, I take the train. Like, bringing us up to speed on what's important and what the problem actually is, then we're able to help you in a much better way. So through different channels. Yeah, and giving us space and time to actually tell you what our propositions are about, because we may have a solution, but we're not telling it in the way that you want to hear it. So if you just take your time and ask us, we'll tell you, because we usually have pretty bright ideas.
Thank you so much, Ronja. And that takes me back to you, Jesper, as the representative here of the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization. You've heard a lot in the first round of the panel in terms of how cities and regions are getting organized to assess where they stand themselves vis-à-vis the SDGs, but also how eager, keen they are to contribute to this voluntary national review process. And from what you've heard and what the poll suggested in terms of the multi-level governance mechanisms, what would be your takeaway going forward to mainstream more this territorial place-based dimension in the voluntary national review?
Thank you. First of all, it's very good to see the engagement, and I also think the central government has a lot to learn from the local governments and the regions, as a lot of the practical work is happening on the ground there. So I think for us to engage more closely, to see more good examples, to have a bit more of a hands-on approach to it would be helpful, because it's always a risk that work with SDGs and sustainability, etc., it goes very quickly to a more theoretical level, or a lot of intentions and goals, but we really have to learn more from the practical examples and how we as a central government can facilitate the good work that's already happening locally.
Excellent, thank you. And that takes me to Anne, back to you as the representative of the Association of Local and Regional Governments. And you mentioned earlier a chapter in the VNR, and how you can crystallize this work and this survey you're doing across local and regional governments in Norway to have a subnational government voluntary review. Anything you wish to add here in terms of where you see potential for the SDGs to improve that collaboration between different municipalities at subnational level?
Thank you, Aziza. I think we touched quite briefly, Christian mentioned it in his opening statements about working together in network. And I think that that's really the way forward here, to share knowledge in a networked and developed approach. And like Christian mentioned, that we are so lucky that we have so eager regional authorities and municipalities that have formed their own network in Norway that Viken is a part of. And we are really just keeping up to speed with those municipalities and regions, and trying to showcase their examples and their work in dialogue with Jesper and the ministry, and really show how the local work with the SDGs are being done in Norway. And also what we haven't maybe touched that much upon today is how also the different SDGs sometimes interlink, and how they sometimes do not correspond, and that's the hard work to be done when you are localizing, to make sure that all the three dimensions are actually being taken care of in the work. So I think I think that just to listen to the local and regional level, and to take the policy advice from that, is a rich way to go.
Absolutely, and that's actually my next question to our last panelist, Gar, as a representative of a municipality. How do you use this SDG framework as a way to manage these sometimes conflicting objectives? Either you go for housing or you go for public space, and I think at the very local level you have that scale where you can see those hotspots and reconcile that into the local planning, this cross-sectoral view behind the SDGs. Could you give us some examples of how you're doing this in Buskerud in particular?
I'll be happy to do that, Aziza. And well, to just comment on what Anna just said, I think KS and also KMD, they are good listeners to listen to the local level, because we can look at it from our perspective and see that this goal and this goal, they have conflicts. We need to, of course, as Hilde was mentioning, try to balance this in our planning, but also in our practical approaches. And I think the best way actually that we can do that as a local authority is to have the networked approach. It's very, very important for us to emphasize the need for a network approach to increase the speed of implementation, because we need speed to be able to implement the SDGs as much as we can of them before 2030. We are also an active party in this sustainability network, and that collection of municipalities and regions that are front runners in their respective works on sustainability, we see that best practices are both shaped, shared, and adopted. And that's maybe the best way we can address our local challenges, is to look at how are others addressing this issue. So the network is a very practical example of how these things can work in unison. We strongly believe that the SDGs, they cannot be reached without a concerted effort. No one can do this alone. So to be able to solve this on our level, we need to listen to the other ones. We need each other. It's as simple and as difficult as that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gar. And that takes us to the end of the panel, and we're on time. This is amazing. Thank you all so much for being both concise and precise, and for deep diving into what you can do individually as major players in this SDGs landscape of Viken and Norway to support the implementation of the recommendations that are provided by this report. We will now have, because we have a good 10 minutes left, and before I turn over to our ambassador for some closing remark, Per-Egil Silvåg, we'd like to do a last poll with the 200 plus participants online. And this is the question you will see on the screen. After a first poll that looked at how cities and regions can best use the SDGs, after a second poll that looked at the must-have or must-do to drive the multi-level governance, here is the third and last poll. How can different levels of government better coordinate their voluntary local review and voluntary national review? And here is the trick. You could actually tick on all these boxes, but we are asking you to pick one of them, the most important lever to facilitate this multi-level coordination of how cities and regions are performing and how the national average in the SDGs is performing. And I see we have a good 20% of the participants that have responded so far, so we'll wait an extra 10 seconds. Pick your choice. Is it mutually engaging each other in the local and national reviews? Is it producing and sharing local and regional data? Is it mapping best practices and raising their profile? Is it creating more formal, maybe institutional mechanisms for that multi-level dialogue to take place? You have to pick one, the most important lever that you consider for different levels of government to work together in this assessment, self-assessment of where they each stand vis-a-vis the SDGs, where they have core prerogatives, and in terms of documenting in a more granular fashion, let's say, the national distance, the country distance to these goals. So we have a good 70%. I suggest that maybe we close the poll if the team agrees, and that we share the results so that we can all see what comes first from a sample of roughly 200 participants that participated today in the webinar. So we will end the poll now and share the results. Excellent. And foremost, 30% top priority, followed by the production and sharing of best practices, local data, and regional data, the creation of institutional mechanisms, and last but not least, the best practices that seem to be largely subject to knowledge sharing now. Thank you very much, and I will close here this part of the webinar. And now it's my pleasure to turn to Ambassador Per-Egil Silvåg. Actually, I tried ambassador with the local team to pronounce your name before. Thank you so much for your help and for your participation today. You've been a champion among the champions for OECD's work on SDGs, and in particular at the local level. We're happy to have you with us to close this webinar. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Aziza. And first of all, let me thank you and your colleagues at the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, CFE, for hosting this webinar. I have to say that the Norwegian delegation to the OECD is located in the OECD on the same floor as the CFE. And I can say without hesitation, we could not have wished for better neighbors. And also thanks to Ulrik Knudsen and Tonje Brenna for introductory remarks, and to all the panelists for their interventions, contributing to this valuable policy dialogue and the resulting report. I would also like to praise the excellent collaboration between the County of Viken, the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization, and the Norwegian Association for Local and Regional Authorities. I was very impressed by the inclusive and multi-stakeholder consultation process carried out over the past year and a half. The poll you conducted with participants at the opening of this webinar, Aziza, on how best to use SDGs for policymaking, highlighted the point of policy development and implementation plans, as well as the point of engaging with citizens and aligning policies across all levels of government. I believe this webinar has shown and demonstrated exactly the importance of these dimensions. This policy dialogue is a clear illustration of how multi-level governance works in practice in Norway, and such a multi-level governance is much needed because the vast majority of the SDGs cannot be achieved without local and regional governments. And like several of our panelists have underlined, the regional and local level is where implementation and where engagement with citizens take place. This is why the national government has recently taken important steps to strengthen horizontal and vertical coordination to implement SDGs, which include a dedicated plan, an action plan. Let me also say that the assessment and recommendations provided in this report are very consistent with what we observe nationwide. Several UN reports and SDG-related indexes show that Norway ranks particularly high in terms of clean energy and universal healthcare. These reports and data also show the increasing focus of political attention to issues related to planetary boundaries, sustainable consumption and production, health and education, equality and employment. But as all countries, we still have a journey to travel to achieve the SDGs by 2030. For instance, Norway's last SDG voluntary national review identified persistent challenges in terms of reducing the portion of youth not in employment, education, or training, which has become an even more important issue with COVID-19. We also need to pursue our efforts to ensure sustainable infrastructure and even improve air quality, and to reduce by half food waste and waste generation. These strengths and challenges largely echo the findings of today's report on a territorial approach to the SDGs in Viken, which shows positive results in terms of poverty alleviation, renewable energy, and low unemployment, but also room for improvement in terms of responsible consumption and production. I would like to congratulate the County of Viken for being a front runner in the implementation of the SDGs in Norway, and for exemplifying how the SDGs can be used to effectively implement a territorial reform and shape a common vision after the merger of 3 smaller counties into Viken County last year. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying this report will not end in a shelf. We stand ready to support the implementation of the OECD recommendations and pursue the dialogue. We were pleased to hear the commitment of today's panelists to go the extra mile and put in place the framework conditions that can accelerate the localization of the SDGs at the county level. Such a political commitment at county level is essential because national government efforts will not suffice. We need all levels of government on board. For example, 1st of March, we held an OECD Council meeting on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development under the theme, Meeting the Challenge of Financing the SDGs in the COVID-19 era. We discussed many levels of action, including unlocking the potential of public procurement, which we have been discussing today. This requires strong dialogue and engagement with local and regional governments. National's expectations regarding regional and municipal planning 2019-2023, issued by the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization, urges councils, counties, and municipalities to integrate the SDGs in their strategic planning. Viken can play an active role in championing the local efforts, and the next voluntary national review of Norway could provide a good opportunity to engage more peer cities and counties in our nationwide SDG implementation efforts. Being pilot, being first, isn't always easy, but it is very important and much appreciated. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and also for your support and the bridge you will continue to provide between Viken and Norway overall to support the implementation of these recommendations. Thank you. And to the local team for a fantastic policy dialogue and for today's excellent webinar. This brings me to the closure of the webinar. I would like to extend some thanks to my team that has worked extremely hard, not only to produce the report, but also to organize the launch. Stefano, whom you've heard, but also Aline and Lawrence and all the support team that is hiding in the back, Liv, and also in the local team, Charlotte, Gun, and all the colleagues for the really great policy dialogue, also between the technical experts. I have to say it's been extremely enlightening for many of us. Let's keep the conversation going. You have the social media on site and via our website accessible. You will soon receive the link to the recording of this webinar. Do not hesitate to spread the words, to broaden the base. You will also receive the PowerPoint presentation that will be uploaded in the coming day or two. And as the final word, I'd like to tell the Norwegian speakers that are connected, and I know we have over 120 of them, because out of the 350 participants, a good half was actually from Norway, that we are inviting you to participate in what Viken colleagues have called an after party that is hosted by the network of local and regional authorities, KS, to discuss the report in Norwegian. I will not lie, I will not participate in that one, but I wish you a great conversation there. It will start right after our webinar, so literally in a minute, and our team will be sharing the link to connect, which you should see on the chat now. So if you are Norwegian and want to continue and know more about Viken in your native language, now is your opportunity. Thank you very much also to all the participants who were online. I hope you could dive into a specific case study and seek appetite to get inspiration from these case studies for your own city and region going forward. Thank you all. And with this, we are closing today's webinar.